All right, it's Code with Cy Scott. Cy, thanks so much for doing these.
You got it. Glad to be back.
So, Andressen Horowitz, famed Andressen Horowitz, they know a thing or two about the way that money runs, the way that markets run, the way that companies are supposed to be built.
And technology. Yeah, that was very fair.
And specifically technology, would you call yourself a SaaS company? Right? You're in the cannabis industry, but.
That's right. We're in the cannabis industry. That's the vertical that we're in, but we're certainly a SaaS company, so software as a service.
So you sent me an article comparing essentially SaaS companies to AI. But before we talk about that difference, since you're in the cannabis industry, we're moving into a next decade here in the cannabis industry, and we're going to talk about how folks are changing their mindset around AI. Folks are also changing their mindset around cannabis. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
How so? You sit on the edge there.
Sure.
That's an AI pun. But how do you see cannabis as we make our way into this, next decade? With your Leafly hat on, with your headset hat on, whatever you want to do.
Yeah, for sure. So 2019 was an interesting year, I think, for the cannabis industry. I think the short of it is quite a correction, at least in the public markets, capital markets. I think what you're seeing with the cannabis industry in general is this kind of cycle kind of from large amounts of hype to really looking at companies that have good business fundamentals that can really run operations and essentially become profitable businesses long term. And I think because of that transition, that's what's reflected in like share price with a lot of these publicly traded companies and investment capital that's available and so on. And I think while it's rough, certainly, I think that it's just part of the process, and we're kind of getting through it. And I have high hopes for 2020. I think that maybe the first 6 months be a bit rocky for some organizations, but towards the tail end of the year, we're going to see good maturity, and the good businesses will emerge and be around for decades to come.
So you could see this, or you could say this is a cannabis winter of sorts, right?
Right. Yeah, I think it's been that way for maybe the last 3 to 6 months. Yeah.
Without a doubt. And the only reason I'm using that nomenclature is because artificial intelligence has had its own winters, and that's where we know that phrase from. There were these initial kind of models that were made by the legends of the past in the 1950s and 60s, and then kind of once we realized how we would have to make that artificial intelligence run, i.e. through a ton of compute, and that compute was not available, there was an AI winter. And then, talk to anybody in that industry and you can come up with 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 winters. But it seems like now to get to that Andressen Horowitz piece, they are looking, at least from their perspective, at artificial intelligence, that industry, as a completely different thing as we make our way into this decade for that industry.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The AI winters, where I think it was like in the 60s, they were like, yeah, and just within a decade, we're going to have, AGI and everything. And it's taken much longer. And you're right. It's the compute and the amount of data that's been available that's really kind of accelerated a lot of that and model generation, but applying a lot of old kind of thoughts to that. Anyways, so, now, this article I thought was pretty interesting, right? Because it is very similar to the cannabis space in the sense that it's looking at business fundamentals for AI-based startups. So I think AI-based startups over the last, maybe 5-10 years, maybe more of like 5 years, seems like anybody who had like a .ai in their domain name got, significant valuation for an early stage startup. But I think now we're starting to look at, what are the fundamentals of the business, and AI versus SaaS, which we're really close to, has some significant differences. And the article really talked about kind of the SaaS model and then the services model. And with the SaaS model, one of the nice things is, software as a service, you get great margins, right? Because you develop software, you get it to market, you produce it once, and then you can sell it multiple times at basically, zero additive costs. So you get, 70 to 80% margins. And then on the other side, you got the services business, which is very low margin, right? Because it's like bespoke work, custom per engagement. So it's kind of looking at those two models and thinking, where does AI fit in? And it's kind of in between, I'd say. The margins seem to be right in the middle there for AI specific startups. Now, at Headset, we're a SaaS startup that leverages some AI or machine learning to do a lot of what we do. So we have, more of SaaS margins, but we do see some of those same trends that they point out in the article, where you have, scale challenges, you have margin challenges, and so on.
So leaving margin challenges aside, or actually because of the human in the loop, that's what brings up the margin challenges. And that's what brings up the scale challenges with artificial intelligence generally, as opposed to artificial general intelligence, AGI, which you referenced earlier. Those organizations, those companies that are selling those services are realizing that the only way to make them work now is by throwing a human into the loop.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the cost factors. Human in the loop, from labeling training data, cleaning up data, but then for like pure AI companies, like self-driving car companies, you've got people that have to sit in the cars, right? And so there are expenses there, certainly. Also, like, there's some examples in the article, like medical professions. You gotta have a doctor there as well to kind of validate some of what the models are telling you. So, people are expensive, so that's definitely a cost center. And I think also on the compute side, it's pretty expensive. What seems to be kind of the trend, there was a good article also, I think last week, about OpenAI, and kind of, I think it was MIT Technology Review did it. And they talked about OpenAI has these two paths, kind of these, kind of Hail Mary, big, large bets, kind of the alphabet model, just like bleeding edge stuff. And then they basically are taking existing models and looking at just going wider and deeper and throwing more compute at it. And that path seems to be doing a bit better, right? Just more data, more compute time, and so on. So if we keep going down that path, it's just going to get more and more expensive. There are things that, are working towards getting those costs down, like TPUs, being able to do, use technology like that, kind of maybe wouldn't help with cost, but with speed by like distributed processing and so on. But cost still a factor. And then the article even references like Moore's law is not keeping up with it, with the amount of compute that's required, even with things like TPUs. So yeah, the cost really does eat into margins. I think the article says about 25% of revenues go to like compute costs.
And that's without processing it. And there's further bottleneck in chips,
Right.
let alone geopolitical issues associated with chips.
Right. Yeah. True. Supply chain challenges that we may be seeing soon.
Yeah. And already are seeing, without question.
Right.
And then add on a pandemic here or there, right? Why not?
Right. Right.
So that all makes one think that if they're, reading about the singularity, about how, dangerous artificial intelligence is right now, not necessarily in the enterprise. You and I can talk about artificial intelligence on the battlefield later, because that's a different thing.
Right. Right.
But as far as models are concerned, what was striking from this piece, and of course we'll put it in the piece here so that folks can click to it, is the similarity between the markets, of the economies of cannabis and artificial intelligence. Both very hyped industries, and that's what I was getting at, not markets, industries, very hyped industries, but each that have to actually grapple with reality at this moment in time.
Right, right. All the investment that comes in to new things like AI, new-ish, right? New trends anyways, and then cannabis, new markets. at the end of the day, yeah, it comes down to business fundamentals, right? And so it's pretty interesting to see some of these patterns coming out around AI. It'll be really interesting to see also what comes up from, the cannabis space and what kind of fundamentals we need to see there as well.
There you go. We'll see what kind of patterns come out around AI, as you just said, and of course, the patterns that AI generates, right?
Right.
Another AI joke for Cy Scott. Thanks so much for your time. As always, can't wait for the next one.
Yeah, you got it, Seth.